So today I'm going to be talking to Joe Sam. Joe, how are you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
As good as it can be in this funny time.
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I've got a traditional first question, which is, what do you do?
Right. Well, I'm a bass player and sometimes guitarist and sometimes producer.
Right. So let's take you back. Let's take you back to sort of like early days, because I'm always interested in how this sort of stuff develops. And so what would you say is your first sort of interest in music, maybe? Or yeah.
Well, that goes back a long way. I mean, I come from a musical family, so it was my parents were in a band, and it was just it seemed like the natural progression. I before I even had any friends or went to school, I'd see my parents in rehearsals and stuff. So I just thought that was what everyone did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, when I got to school and met other people and, their parents weren't in bands, it was a bit of a shock to me.
Yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it? That is a really interesting thing where, like, when you realize that your world isn't normal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The norm, let's put it that way. So what sort of music did your parents do?
So they were in various different bands. They had like a 1950s rock and roll type band called the Ace of Clubs. They had a kind of, I mean, this is back in the 80s now, so they had this kind of funk kind of pop band called Dirty Tricks.
Oh yeah.
They were also in a band called the Warwick Low Band for a while, which kind of like pop covers and stuff. So they did all sorts of stuff really, and just kind of surrounded by it. I'd sit in the rehearsal room with them, strumming an acoustic guitar, annoying them from a very young age.
So this is, when you get that, and it becomes really quite subliminal, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, as you say, your paradigm of existence is surrounded by music. I think that's really interesting.
Very much so, yeah.
So you were obviously playing guitar very early on.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's a drummer, and my mum was a singer, and we had this various guitars that their band members had donated or given to us as kids. My brother's a drummer as well, but I started off on drums because it was the most accessible, immediate sort of thing to play, and I could watch my dad do it, sit on his lap and pick up the sticks and stuff, and then so both myself and my brother we started that way. But I always had an interest in guitar and bass, especially bass, but being so small, and in the 80s there wasn't such a thing as like small basses or medium scale or short scale basses, so it wasn't an option. So I would just strum on the guitar without knowing any chords or knowing any where to put my hands. I'd just kind of make it up, and so I built up a sense of rhythm before I kind of knew what to do with anything. And then it was only really when I got to secondary school, kind of when I met you really, that I started to pick up my knowledge of what to do on the guitar. So around sort of the age of 12, 13, I had some ideas, but yeah, it was drums before that. I was in bands playing drums and stuff, but my brother was, being that little bit older, he had a bit of a head start on me, so he was always that little bit better. So I didn't see the point in having two drummers in the family. So
yeah. So that's interesting. So that you're finding yourself then moving towards playing bass eventually.
Yeah.
So what's the what point do you sort of go like, that's what I'm doing?
Well, when I was kind of so between the ages of like 12 to 13 and 14, I was in a band with my brother who played the drums, like I just said, and this other guy we knew called Dylan. His dad was actually the bass player from the band Heatwave.
Oh.
But he used to play bass and sing, and he was an incredible musician. So I was on guitar, and I really enjoyed it, and we were kind of like big into the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Rage Against the Machine and things like that. So that's the kind of stuff we did. And then the band broke up, and we sort of parted ways with Dylan, and that was kind of the turning point for me. And because Dylan, he'd always leave his bass at our house, and I'd pick it up and play it, and that was it. I no longer had a band to play guitar in, and I'd kind of picked up enough on the bass to sort of want to run with it, and I think at that time I discovered the band Jamiroquai, and Stuart Zender, who was just phenomenal bass player, and that music's all about it, and it really spoke to me. And since then, I've actually become quite good friends with Stuart. But it's quite a slap in the face, like this is the bass, and this is what it can do. I'd heard Flea, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I'd heard Primus, and lots of stuff that kind of had a wow factor to it. But when I heard Jamiroquai, it really it did something to me. So then I got a cheap bass and got some lessons off. I don't know if you remember Tony Harlow.
Yes,
I got some lessons off him.
Yeah, Tony. Yeah.
And so then never really looked back. And occasionally I will. These days, if I'm doing some of my own music, I'll play some guitar. Or in the studio, occasionally I'll get called to do it, but mainly it's the bass that I do.
So there's a few things, with this sort of the whole idea about the creative part of what inspires people, because I'm intrigued by all of that, the psychology behind what motivates people, and that thing of hearing somebody that suddenly really switches you on, which is interesting because you're already sort of mentioned a couple of people that would have already sparked a lot of interest in other players.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until you sort of hear Jamiroquai and it's like, okay, this really.
Yeah. Well, I think for when it comes to like, I guess if I go back to when my parents were in a band, and they were in this band Dirty Tricks, and they had this bass player called Kevin Draper. No, not Kevin Draper, Graham Draper. It was Kevin Amos was the guitarist. Yeah, Graham Draper. And he really inspired me from an early age, but it wasn't something that I really kind of noticed until, I was happy playing guitar, the other stuff. And then like you say, listening to the Chili Peppers, you'd think Flea would be like, I want to play bass, but I was always more into John Frusciante anyway. For the Chili Peppers, I loved Flea, but the guitar was what really excited me about that band at that age. And with Primus, it was exciting, but it was not enough to make me want to ditch the guitar. And I'm still a big Primus fan, and I'll still listen to them a lot, and Les Claypool's been a big influence on my playing, but it was when I heard Jamiroquai, it was one particular song, actually. It was Just Love the Story off the album Return of the Space Cowboy. What the bass does in that is it was a new feeling that I'd never felt before.
Okay.
And I think that's
I really like what you're saying here. Because
yeah.
like with the sort of the NLP type of aspect about, you know, the feeling thing or the what you're hearing,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe because you were already a drummer, as you know,
Yeah.
from very early on. I can really get that sort of the thing about the feeling of what the guy was doing.
Exactly. And I think with Primus and the Chili Peppers, it was, you know, they're very heavy slap bass at the time.
Yeah.
And this was something different. I mean, you know, there was slap bass with Jamiroquai, but that wasn't what excited me. It was with Stuart Zender, there's a certain feeling that he has that no one else has. And even to this day, you know, sort of 20, 30 years later, he's you know, those records still give me the same feelings that they did when I was 14. You know, so
because I'm just sort of thinking about that from the point of view, like for myself, you know, what it was that I heard that made me suddenly go, oh, that's it, it's the guitar, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a mix, really, but I can sort of pinpoint moments, songs that you sort of go, that just takes you somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, you know, I did have those moments with guitar before. You know, I had loads of moments playing along to either Blood Sugar Sex Magic or One Hot Minute. I would listen to those albums, play along, and you get that moment where you get it so that you really feel like you're in the band when you're young. It's like you match the sound and you match the rhythm in your head, at least, you know, and you get that feeling of unity with it. But when I heard that Jamiroquai thing, it was a different thing, and I did get that later on playing along to the records, but instantly there was just this whole I mean, I encourage anyone to listen to that track, Just Another Story, and really focus on the bass, because it's got a character, it's got an expression that it's not just a bass line. It's a great bass line, but there's so much personality in it, and I think that is what sets it apart from everyone else. You know?
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's really well described, actually, because it is so difficult, isn't it, to explain what goes on with a piece of music, because it is sort of beyond words, really.
Exactly, and I think a lot of bass players that I know and, you know, come across, and they without meaning to be disrespectful, you know, they'll kind of play the part and they'll learn the part, but there's no room for their personality to come through in that playing. And for me, that's such an important part. You know, you want to express yourself, right? I mean, obviously, you want to be respectful to the song and not, you know, for want of a word, you know, mark your territory too much with it. But you still want to have some of yourself come through it. And I think, you know, that's very important because I think the audience feel it too. You know, whether it's a recording or a live gig. I think, you know, if you're just up there playing the notes with feel and, you know, playing it well, it's not the same as having something to say with it, you know.
Yeah, totally. We're in the same ballpark. Because you know, one of the reasons behind all this thing with the podcast, and I've got a couple of other projects, it's about sort of like reclaiming music from it just being some sort of commodity.
Yeah.
You know, where music obviously goes through different cycles of stuff, but if you think about music that really impacts styles of music that really impact society in a way, they're not a commodity. Sometimes they're sort of broken loose. You know, you could look at that from the sort of the punk thing or rock and roll when it first kicks off.
Yeah,
it's like it's sort of unleashed, and I think you get that within a genre when you get somebody that appears that's just not like the others.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I really miss that, man. It's rare that you see that these days, because, I mean, I don't know whether it's because everything's been done before, or if it's because of, you know, the way in which the industry operates, and you know, albums don't sell anymore, so people don't have the incentive to do this sort of stuff, and musicians now, they're not getting together with the hope of getting signed and having that sort of dream. They're just like, okay, how can we make some money?
There's something in that, what you're saying, because it's like the magic sort of disappeared out of things.
Yeah.
You know, and I really mean that. It's almost like, you know, when I think back to the sort of music that I was listening to, sort of late 60s, early 70s, you could sort of believe in some of that stuff. Like it was, it was like the gospel according to, you know, Led Zeppelin, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was, you could listen to the lyrics, and you could listen to the music, and there was something that you could lose yourself in there.
Definitely.
And I don't know whether that's, I don't know, perhaps it does happen, but you get moments of it, but it's not consistent.
No, it really isn't. And I think today you have kind of breakthrough people in terms of their ability or their talent. You know, you have people like Jacob Collier, you have you know, Dirty Loops, and some uber musicians, you know, that have all this amazing skill. But what I'm really missing is these icons. It's people that have something inspirational to say and express, that can, you know, I mean, let's not get it twisted. I mean, some of these people in the past that had all these amazing things to say and do weren't always savory characters, you know.
No,
so
they weren't. Exactly.
But it's the message that they had in their music, you know, whether it's Jimi Hendrix or Sly Stone or Bob Marley or, you know, anyone. There was something that they spoke for generations. They spoke for the masses, and I don't think we've really had that since, you know, if I think about it, like Amy Winehouse and you know, maybe the Arctic Monkeys. They kind of had this were the closest thing that we've had recently to that. And now that we're living in an age when, you know, even hip hop was something where the lyrics were important to people because they meant something, you know, like now you've got mumble rap and trap, and it just doesn't mean anything. And, you know, it's a shame, you know, and all the artists, like, you know, that still did it, they're getting old, or they don't have anything to say anymore, or they're not relevant, or they've died, you know, and that's a real shame. It's you know, when Prince left, that was one of the last real great torchbearers, I think. You know, and I often wonder what these people would have to say about today's society and culture.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah.
I always look at these things as like these people as anomalies.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I always use Hendrix as an example. Hendrix wasn't the best guitar player at all, because there was all these jazzers who were like, you know, you had Wes Montgomery, for God's sake, you know, Pat Martino and you know, Tal Farlow and Barney Kessel. I mean, sort of Hendrix comes along, and immediately he is the thing. He is what it is.
Yeah.
And same with Prince. I remember the first time I heard Prince, somebody had this album, and it was like, you got to hear this, you know. And it was like, my God, who is this guy? You know, you got to remember at that point in time, there were bands like Talking Heads. There wasn't anybody out there, and obviously Bowie and people like that, and Iggy Pop. But he'd appeared where you look at this and, you know, like Hendrix, they could assimilate lots of things,
yeah,
lots of styles of playing, and then be able to do something else with it. It's, you know, it was a little bit like sort of some sort of highwayman had come along and nicked a load of stuff and was flogging it off as something else.
Yeah.
And you know, I could see that. I can see that in Prince, and I could see that in Amy Winehouse. You know, you could look at Amy Winehouse's singing. I've mentioned this before, but you know, she had this ability to sing like Dinah Washington. You know, but there was something else.
Yeah,
it was that sort of thing that she'd nailed a start, she'd nailed a technique, but there was something else. And that's the thing, as you say, what is it that makes that stuff relevant? What are they talking about? What? And it might not be direct. It's not like somebody's lyrics are necessarily saying what it is.
Yeah.
But they make people think. They make people experience something differently. And again, you can't classify it. That's the thing with this. And I think you're right about what is it that people have got to say, you know, because again, we're back into a situation that people can't say very much at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's disastrous, really, for where we're going.
I think so. You know, I think one of the keys to these old, you know, legends is not just the fact that, I mean, not they were relatable. You had a common ground where they were talking about things that you understood, and you felt like, oh wow, my voice of reason is being confirmed. You know, this is a you know, it resonates with me. But they also had this untouchable sort of mystique about them as well.
Yes.
So, you know, whether it's, I mean, the Beatles, for example, they had, you know, a lot of like working class ethics and things they would talk about in their songs, but yet they had this immense star quality.
Mm.
So you put those two things together, and you could, you know, it really captivates people.
Mm.
But with Jimmy, I mean, his lyrics are amazing, and he talks about a lot of stuff. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone express themselves as well on an instrument as Jimi Hendrix.
No.
And I think
not even Jacko.
no.
Stories.
See, this is the thing. Jaco Pastorius was, for me, the best and the worst thing that ever happened to bass guitar.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have moments of absolutely loving him, and I have moments of complete indifference to him, because I very rarely find myself wanting to put on a Jacko record. Mm. And it's only the odd occasion when, you know, someone else is playing it, or I do decide to put it on, that I'm actually like, wow, this is actually pretty incredible. But for me, I would rather listen to Paul McCartney. I would rather listen to James Jamerson. I'd rather listen to Carol Kay than Jaco Pastorius. And you know, I've never really been one for the kind of virtuoso uber musician. I mean, Jacko is a bit different because he still did it in the context of musicality, and it wasn't just for show. But I think, you know, I don't have any Marcus Miller records. I don't have any Victor Wooten records. You know, what I've got is the Beatles. I've got Pino Palladino. I've got, you know, all these people that it was all about the song and what they brought to the song and how they enhanced it. But yeah, if you just focus on them, you'll have an amazing time. So, you know, Jacko was expressive, but with Jimmy, I mean, I can hear Jimmy's influence in Jacko. You can tell that Jacko likes Jimmy. But as far as, I can't think of anything. Like when you watch the Fillmore East and you see Jimmy play Machine Gun, I don't think there's anything that comes close to that in terms of expression, you know, and you really get the sense you're in a war zone as well, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Actually, there's a film of Hendrix doing Johnny Be Good, and I think that might be from the same film. I don't know.
I know he did that at the Isle of Wight.
No,
So
this is it's. I think originally it was on an album called In the West or something like that. But anyway,
okay,
there's just a part in it. I mean, the whole thing is just incredible,
yeah,
because he takes a sort of a standard and just turns it inside out and back to front.
mm.
And I remember sort of working out one of the solos on this thing and feeling quite proud of myself. And
Yeah.
about a year or so later, I saw the film of it, and because he plays that part with his teeth,
Right.
like, you sort of go, okay, back to the drawing board. But there's a part in it right at the end where he plays this sort of solo part, and he hits there's a bit of feedback that just comes out of nowhere, and he's on it.
Yeah,
And he uses a whammy bar to sort of make that
yeah,
sing, and you just think, oh my God, that is just incredible, because it was a moment that he could have missed, and he didn't.
yeah.
And
it's interesting. I think when you hear other guitarists do these sort of things, for me, it never has the same impact. It's something about Jimmy that just, he could do anything. He could make mistakes. He could be flashy and flamboyant, put his arm over the top of the guitar and play with his teeth. And when I see other people do that, I just think, ugh.
yeah, no, it just doesn't work, does it?
But with Jimmy, it's like you can't help but smile,
Yeah, because it was sort of like, that was him. It was this coming back again to this thing of who is the person, what character comes out of it.
Yeah.
And I can take your point with with sort of Jacko and go, Steve Vai, or there are others that even more so. You sort of think,
I mean, they all have their place, right?
They do have their place, absolutely, and I'm certainly not knocking their technique, but it's just really, well, what is it? What's the song doing?
Yeah. Well, then we get into how this plays a part in the modern world, and you have Instagram, and you have these
TikTok.
30-second clips of people, just playing chops, and it's all very impressive. But I'm really starved of good music these days. And it's such a shame. I mean, I think there's only really one artist that I can think of that I'm genuinely excited when something new comes out, and that's D'Angelo. Because he just does things differently. Every time he releases something, it's like a new sound. And it's never self-indulgent. It's never over the top. It's pure feeling and emotion and great songwriting. And I hear all these bands like Hiatus Coyote and people like that. And when I first heard them, I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is really good. But then after a while, I'm like, okay, well, I've heard this sound now, and it seems to be. I mean, I might be alone with this to a certain extent. I know a lot of people really, really get off on it, but I saw them live, and I was really impressed with how good they were. But I also felt like I was watching one song for the whole night. But it's these older guys who would you had musical song context playing and stuff. I really miss it. I really do. And with Instagram being the way it is, I worry that it's influencing the next generation in the wrong way. And I see like 10-year-old kids playing bass better than me, and I'm like, wow, what's going on? And it's kind of great to see from a I think there is something happening with young musicians. You seem to be seeing a lot of really, really highly skilled, amazing, talented musicians. But like I said, I'm not hearing the music. No. But then again, you have to think, well, what's the incentive for people to do this anymore when people aren't buying records? You put stuff on Spotify and you get no money. So, you know, so many things have changed. The goalposts have shifted completely, and it's not viewed in the same way anymore. You know, musicians are concerned about, well, will this get a sync? You know, will this be on an advert or on the TV or, you know, in a movie or something, rather than, you know, are people going to hear this and enjoy it and buy it? And it's, you know, I heard something like 65,000 songs are released a day on Spotify. So, you know, people hated record companies back in the day.
Yeah, I know.
But, you know, they kind of miss them now.
Yeah, I think with the whole paradigm has shifted
Definitely.
in such a way that, again, yeah, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. That let's come back to you. We might touch on that a bit later. So you've let's get to the point where you're obviously playing bass, and you're when do you get to that moment of thinking, I've got, you know, this is happening for me? Like technically, first of all.
I don't know. It wasn't something that I've always just had an enthusiasm and without sounding pig-headed, like a kind of natural talent for music. And I was always, at a young age, unless it was kind of like theory-based stuff, I never really had to try that hard to improve. And as a consequence, I had massive gaps in my theory. I had, you know, my right hand could do lots of stuff, and my left hand could just about keep up. And it was only when I got older that I realised there's only so much you can rely on natural ability. You have to put the effort in as well once you get to a certain stage, and that's where I kind of like, you know, started to struggle a little bit, because I wasn't used to operating in that way. You know, I just kind of took things in my stride before. But I think, you know, before the internet and living in a small town, and the radio not representing the actual talent that's out there, you know, I built up a confidence of being the only person in the area or that I knew that could do this sort of stuff. And, you know, obviously there were loads of other people around, but you didn't have the internet. I was too young to go to jam nights and all this sort of stuff. So I didn't really kind of see it. So the fact that I could play along with these records kind of gave me the confidence that, you know, I should stick with this, you know. And, you know, I've always been in bands, always, you know. So it's been quite a natural progression, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I always had faith in myself and just stuck with it, you know.
So what would you say is the first, you know, band that you were working in that you sort of thought, you know, I'm trying to get that point where you know where you're going?
I think there's been many of those occasions, really, and you know, life evolves and people come and go in your life, and you have different chapters. And, you know, that first band I was talking about when I was, you know, on guitar with my brother and Dylan, you know.
How old were you?
I was between the age of 12 and 14. And, you know, we had a lot going for us. You know, we were young, we had a great energy, we could play well, and we had, you know, Dylan was this amazing singer and bass player who just had oodles of character and charisma, and you know, we could have gone a long way, but it didn't happen. We split up, and then, you know, move on to other things. I mean, but even before that, when I was on drums, you know, I was in a band called Blue Memphis, and we were on, you know, Live and Kicking and Why Don't You and TV shows and stuff like that. And so, you know, at that point I was like, you know, at the age of 9 or 10, really excited, thinking we're going to conquer the world. But it's a naive view to have when you're 9 or 10. You know, there's been many of those occasions, I think. And it's only when you kind of get a bit older and start to, you know, develop a little bit of wisdom as to what the industry is like and how difficult it is, that maybe those ideas kind of don't come so easily. But you know, there was never any doubt that music was what I wanted to do. You know, so the idea of until coronavirus, the idea of having any other job just seemed strange, you know, strange to me. But yeah, I mean, I had those moments on guitar. I didn't really have those moments on bass so much, because it was just, you know, well, there was always one element missing in the bands I was in. We either didn't have the right singer, or we didn't have X or whatever. So it was just a case of playing for fun and doing the odd gig and whatever. So yeah.
So what would you say is your big sort of, I hate this, but big break when you start thinking, you know, you start to connect with?
I guess that kind of, I mean, I guess that's tied in with like finance and being able to be a professional musician. You know, I think I first got. It's funny how things happen. There was like one event kind of sparked off loads of others.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. So yes. I went to see Larry Graham, bass player from the Sly and the Family Stone, and played with Prince and had an amazing band himself. I saw him a few times from like 2010 up until about 2017. He would come over like every year and do shows. And he always does this thing where he will play If You Want Me to Stay, and he will invite musicians in the audience that, you know, he doesn't know are there, you know, just to come up and play. And usually you get, you know, it'd be interesting to see who was in the audience and get up and play. And, you know, it'd always be a bit of a novelty thing. And I think I was the kind of, as far as my knowledge, you know, lets me know, I was the first person that really sort of pointed at him and said, "Give me your bass." And so I did that. And I made a good account of myself. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I think someone filmed it, and it's on YouTube and other platforms and stuff. Since then, every time he's come over, he's had an extra bass on standby, so he doesn't have to give them his bass. But I got to play his bass, which I was really, really chuffed about. And so I've done that with Larry about 3 or 4 times now. But it was the first time that was the most special one. And as a consequence of that, it was put on Facebook, it was put on YouTube, and suddenly if musicians would start contacting me. This drummer, Pete Ray Biggin, who he plays for Level 42. He used to play for Mark Ronson and Incognito, and he's a massively in-demand drummer. He sort of contacted me out of the blue and asked me to play a gig for his band, PB Underground. So I did that, and then we had a gig at the Hippodrome Casino, and opening for Pete was this singer called Vanessa Haynes, and she sings with Incognito. And her bass player is a guy called Francis Hilton. And so I did that gig with Pete, and then Francis saw me, and a couple of years later, out of the blue, I just get this message from Francis saying, "Joe, can you depth for me?" And I'm like, "Sure, yeah. What's the gig?" And he's like, "Oh, Incognito." So I'm like, "Wow, okay. This is very interesting," because I've been following Incognito for the past couple of years and just like seeing where they were traveling and what they were doing, and thinking to myself, "Wow, that'd be a really great gig to have." And then he messages me, and so it's kind of like, was that a manifestation thing, or was it just like
well, it's one of those weird things that happens frequently.
Exactly, because they've been on my mind a lot, and I was thinking how much I'd love to do it, and then I get to do it without having to really like do anything. It just kind of fell in my lap, which was really sweet. And then on the strength of that, I did the first gig with Incognito, and there's no rehearsal. You just got to learn the songs, turn up, and play. And I've always thrived at being in the deep end in certain situations, and I think it brings something out of you. You can either sink or swim, and in real life, I'm not much of a swimmer, but in these situations, I've always I don't know what happens, whether it's adrenaline or just something comes through you, but I feel like in those situations I play better than I normally do, and I can't explain it. I had a similar sort of situation. There's this jam night in London, this place called Troy Bar, on a Friday, and there's this bass player that used to be in the house band called Rick Leon James, and he's many people regard him as being just a bit of a phenomenon. And I bumped into him outside a place called Charlie Wright's in London on a Thursday evening, and he just looked at me and said, "You're a bass player, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, can you depth for me tomorrow night at Troy Bar?" I'm like, "Oh God, okay." Tomorrow night, right? Okay, what have I got to play? Oh, I've got to play Teen Town. I've got to play all these.
So back to Jacko.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to play all these funk fusion songs that are actual proof and things like that. And I'm like, okay, I've got to finish this gig tonight and then go home and practice for tomorrow evening. So I did that, and again, being in the deep end somewhat, I thrived, and it was really good. So those situations have been very telling to me. But it was after doing this gig at the Hippodrome when Francis Hilton from Incognito, and he saw me and gave me the Incognito gig. He saw how well I'd done for Incognito. Luckily, they filmed it, so he was able to see how well I adapted to the role. And ever since then, whenever there's something he can't do, he throws me a bone. So that's been really handy. And I suddenly got a message from this guy called Theo in America saying, "Oh, can I do this gig?" And it turned out to be Sister Sledge. And that was through Francis as well. So, I've got a lot to thank Francis for. He's been very good to me. And that's kind of where I am now. I mean, there's been lots of other things in my life that I've been doing alongside this, personal, original projects that I've been involved in. But it was, as a bass player, I think that's that one meeting with Larry Graham has sparked off all these other events, which is great. They always say it's about being in the right place at the right time. So
yeah, it is. And talking to people, those happenings are common. Okay, they only happen once or twice to each person, but they are common in the stories.
Yes.
And they are also very odd, like people bumping into somebody in the middle of London who doesn't live in London. Neither of them live in London, but they happen to see, that might come from, I don't know, Hastings or somewhere, and they just, somebody's just come back from a tour with no other work now from Scandinavia, and they bump into one another in London. He goes, "Oh, it's really strange. I was thinking about you the other day. There's a band looking for a guitar player, and do you fancy a gig? It's a European tour."
Yeah.
And it's you go like, yeah, okay, this is very odd, but it's very common. But
Definitely.
you wouldn't get that situation without the graft.
Of course. Yeah.
And I think that's again, we're back to that thing that you were saying a little while ago about the sort of culture of music now. It's whether you're going to do, are we going to make any money out of this type of thing, instead of it being something that you do, and it's all part of what you do. And I remember a conversation that I had with a jazz musician, a guy called Race Newton. And he used to work I think he used to work with people like Chet Baker, but he was sort of telling stories about working with Art Tatum, be like the warm-up act for somebody like Tatum. And he said people never went home. You just hung around after the gig, and people just sat around. And Tatum was still playing the piano, at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's just sort of sitting around, because you wouldn't go home if somebody like that was still playing. You just sort of hang around.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't a job. It was a lifestyle. And I think there's that sort of element of it, and it's sort of, I won't say it's disappearing, but maybe it's got to come up somewhere else, maybe another style of music. I don't know.
I think it means something different. I think it still happens. I mean, there's still networking, and you've got places in London now, where people go to the upstairs at Ronnie Scott's and things like that, and hang around there, and you'll meet people and you'll get work, but the work isn't the same.
No.
And I think that's the thing that's changed, is that back in the day, if you were hanging around there, you might end up meeting people and getting in a great project, and the world was very much more open to possibilities back then, as to what would be marketable, what would be sellable, what people would be into, and there was new grounds were broken all the time. But now the networking is like, I can call them for this function, or we might be on this pop gig together, and it's not the same thing. It doesn't have the same the kudos, and the appeal isn't the same. I mean, I've had my fair share of networking sort of endeavors to try and meet new people, and some of it's been great. I've made some great friends and great connections. I'm quite close to many of the Jamiroquai band now, and that's come through that. But it's I've done weddings with members of Jamiroquai. It's not the same as like going on a tour doing some cool music, or like writing anything, or for any purpose of any success. It's strange, and I've kind of got over the whole hustle now. I'm not so inclined to pimp myself out at the after party of some night in London anymore, because it's just I'm getting too old for it, and the rewards aren't what they used to be. So
No.
I'm quite happy just doing what I do and letting the universe take care of the rest, really.
Yeah. I think I don't think there's a way of I think what it is that I'm trying to express here is that when you look at sort of musical styles that develop, that nobody's planned it, it's just arrived, and it runs its course, and then it sort of fades away, or it becomes something else.
Yeah.
And I mentioned jazz. I mean, that's quite a good example of that, where it starts off and nobody's interested in it from a financial point of view, and then suddenly everybody's interested in it from a financial perspective, and then it literally dies, and then transforms into something else, and it's killed off by rock and roll or whatever. And then the same thing goes on with rock and roll. It starts off that nobody understands what that is.
Yeah.
And then the big money gets, and you look at it, and that seems to be the thing. So, and I'm just wondering whether it requires something like that with a musical, and it might not even be music. It might be something else. God only knows now. I really don't know. But there seems to be something lacking where, as I said, it's like this sort of commoditization of stuff where everything has to be, there's just something missing. I just don't know what it is, but.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, that, isn't it? I mean, I think there are probably many factors that have played a part in that. I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the effects that the internet and social media has on these sort of things, because it's kind of brought everyone together, but it's separated everyone at the same time. And in the past, without these things, you rely on these chance encounters to meet new people and to have this spark of interest for something new. Whereas now it's like there's almost a saturation of
yes
people posting their things on social media. And it's like, well, okay, it's I have the same kind of philosophy with the music I like as well. And so if I listen to Stuart Zender, I go back to him again. You listen to the Jamiroquai albums, and he'll do a few licks, he'll do a few fills, but he will never do too much. And when you have things in moderation like that, it kind of leaves you wanting more, but you don't get it. So that just keeps you hungry. Whereas this Instagram modern musician of just chops after chops after chops, like, you get saturated very quickly and they lose their impact, And I think this is the same for, the way we soak up new things. There's so much of it. It's like being in a restaurant when there's too much on the menu. You're like, well, what do I choose? So
I do think it's a really, really valid point, because I've just thought, when you sort of start off, well, when I started off, what was available was only what you could buy on a record and then work out by ear. Music books were all wrong, in the wrong key and all the rest. And I was talking to somebody the other day, because when we talked about Chaz Hodges, Chaz and Dave. Chaz, he was obviously a generation before me. So it's like, when I could get hold of the records, but he could, he had to know somebody in the Merchant Navy who could bring a record back from America. And but now, because there was a limit to what you could get your hands on, you just got good at that thing. But now there's just too much. You don't get the depth of the knowing, and I think that's probably, you look at that and it's like everything. We just need a good fast. There's too much food. There's just too much everything.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have the same meaning. When you have things become disposable when they're abundant, and I think sometimes scarcity is
I think maybe in a lot of cases scarcity is a good thing. But so what things are coming back online now then that you're dealing with musically?
Well, I mean, depends how deep you want to go with this, but I mean, I've got some Sister Sledge gigs coming up. I had one last week, which was great, and I've got 2 this weekend. I've also got weddings and functions and the bread and butter stuff coming up. But it's the old, is touring going to be what it used to be? Because there's Brexit, which puts
yes, we haven't even spoken about that, have we?
No, exactly. So that's immediately that's made people kind of anxious about it. I don't know what it's really going to be like yet. But I mean, people have toured outside Europe with no problem. So, potentially touring in Europe will just be like doing that. It won't be as easy as it was in the past, but but then there are other people who think that, with good reason, that Brexit has made the rest of Europe want to make things difficult for us.
Yes.
So
I would say so. Sounds like it.
Whether I've heard things like, oh, you can tour in a tour bus, but you're only allowed to stop 3 times, or things like that. It's like, well, okay, great, it's going to be worth my while. So there's that, and then there's the whole. I mean, I don't really want to get into this too deep, but the whole vaccine thing. What is going to be required of you to go to these different places around the world, and I already had to turn one gig down in Monte Carlo with Sister Sledge because I would have been needed to quarantine for 7 days, be in an Italian hotel by myself and not be paid for my time to do one gig. It just seemed like something I couldn't do. But yet the Americans had no problem. It's only the Brits that had to quarantine. So go figure that one out. So yeah, I mean, what the future holds, I don't know. I have my beliefs, I have my values and stuff, but maybe that's for another interview. I don't know, but it's definitely up in the air a little bit, should we say?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, to be honest, I'm just like watching this stuff from a distance, and looking at even things like, because we haven't even got into things like music education, because I'm looking at that and thinking, what is there in that at the moment? Because it's all very strange. Everything's very odd at the moment.
It is, yeah.
But we'll see. Anyway, that was awesome.
Thanks, Vic.
It's good to get you on board, because we did sort of speak a little while ago, but we never really got anything sorted out. But
no, I think at that time I was kind of scratching around looking for ways to earn the money, and I've realised that I'm not really much for teacher.
Well, at the moment, to be honest, I don't know where that's going.
Yeah.
Because I don't know where people are in their selves. Some people, it's like a bit of a mix of things. So like some people like that was the thing they were going to do because it gave them some meaning.
Yeah.
And then the other people have just sort of like almost fell off the map. So it's affected people in very strange ways.
Well, and that doesn't really, it saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me so much because
it doesn't surprise me. No.
I mean, if there's very limited ways of actually earning a living as a musician, then what incentive is it to really study it? And that's the sad thing. I've always felt like if you've got a skill or something, it's at some point in your life, it's your duty to sort of pass it on.
Yes.
But I'm thinking now, well, okay, so music's always going to be necessary, but in what capacity and in what format, and do we really want to be living in a world where the biggest hope you have is syncability and commercialization? It kind of reminds me of the movie Demolition Man. I don't know if you've seen that, but all the music is commercials. That's all it is. So,
I think it's a case of watching this space.
Yeah.
Because I think, we're just talking about music, but this is true of theatre, dance, all manner of things. It's almost like the things that humans need to be human, throughout our history, are the very things that are being pushed aside as if they're not important.
Well, because we're not important, are we? Let's face it. I mean, that's the I think that's the bitterest pill to swallow is that, when you're living in this, I'm not just talking about capitalism, but the extreme end of it that we're in now, where everything is commercial, everything is, meaningless.
Yes.
You look at schools, and when I was at school, there were people talking about how their arts weren't funded enough. But going back to that would be amazing. You think of it these days, it's tragic. Everyone's being encouraged to do, to be a worker, to be this drone ant. But we do have things where people are making millions of pounds off doing YouTube videos. So I mean, there is some way of doing it on your terms, but yet, do these, how many of these YouTube accounts have any substance?
Exactly.
So that's the payoff in it. I mean, you want to be able to have your artistic integrity, have your morals in the right place, and not have to dumb down or sell out to some kind of, you look at the people on Instagram with the most followers, and then that will kind of tell you where the where the line is. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that are flexible thinkers tend to be the artists anyway, so that we'll see where we go with this.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that was brilliant, Joe. Thanks for your time.
No worries, man.
Good catching up with you, and all the very best for everything. All right.
You too, mate. You too.
Cheers.
Thank you very
much. Bye.
Bye.
So links on the show notes if you want to find out more about Joe's work, and obviously there is some stuff if you want to support the show or the charity or find out about Blues Camp, etc. So yes, until next time. See you then.